The air hung heavy with the scent of aged wood and forgotten things. The shop was a labyrinth of memories, each corner filled with relics of the past, waiting to be discovered. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows, casting an ethereal glow over the dusty shelves and forgotten treasures. Eliza, a young woman with an insatiable curiosity for the past, browsed the aisles of the antique shop. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she moved from one display to another, each item a potential key to a forgotten story. She loved the thrill of uncovering hidden stories in forgotten objects. To her, each piece was a puzzle, a fragment of history waiting to be pieced together. Each piece whispered tales of bygone eras, of lives lived and lost. The shop was a silent storyteller, its shelves lined with the echoes of the past. Today she hoped to find a unique piece for her modest apartment, something that would not only add character to her home, but also connect her to the rich tapestry of history.
Each of these objects holds a fragment of a story, waiting to be pieced together. They are like time capsules, preserving moments from the past.
Eliza's fingers trailed over tarnished silver, chipped china, and yellowed photographs. She imagined the hands that had once held these items, the lives they had touched. Her heart quickened with each object she touched. It was as if she could feel the pulse of history beneath her fingertips. She rounded a corner, her gaze falling upon a collection of antique mirrors propped against the wall. Each mirror seemed to hold a different story, a different reflection of the past. Their ornate frames, some gilded, some intricately carved, hinted at their former glory. They were like windows into another time, each one offering a glimpse into a different era. One in particular drew her in. It stood out from the rest, its presence almost commanding her attention. It was taller than she was, its silver frame tarnished and etched with time. The intricate designs on the frame told a story of craftsmanship and care. The glass, cloudy with age, held an eerie, almost magnetic pull. It was as if the mirror was a portal, inviting her to step into another world.
"What a peculiar mirror," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the shop.
Eliza cautiously approached it, her breath catching in her throat. She felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension as she drew closer, as she saw her reflection, or rather, a distortion of it. The image in the mirror was not quite her own, but a twisted, elongated version of herself. Her features seemed blurred, elongated, as if the mirror itself was hesitant to reveal its secrets. It was as if the mirror was alive, its surface shifting and changing. She felt a chill creep down her spine, yet she couldn't tear her gaze away. The mirror seemed to hold her captive, its eerie reflection drawing her in deeper. Slowly she reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as they neared the surface of the glass. She hesitated for a moment, then gently touched the mirror. The glass was cold, sending a shiver through her body. She felt a strange connection, as if the mirror was trying to communicate with her. Startled, she pulled her hand away, her heart pounding in her chest. She took a step back, her mind racing with questions. What was it about this mirror that captivated her so? She looked around the shop, hoping to find some answers, but the shop remained silent, its secrets hidden in the shadows. Taking a deep breath, she tried to calm herself. She knew she had to find out more about this peculiar mirror. It was as if it was calling to her, urging her to uncover its story. With a newfound determination, Eliza decided she would not leave the shop without learning the mirror's secrets. She felt a sense of purpose, a mission to uncover the truth behind the eerie reflection. She approached the shopkeeper, her mind filled with questions. She was ready to delve into the history of the mirror, to uncover the stories it held within its tarnished frame. The shopkeeper began to speak, his voice low and filled with the weight of years. Eliza listened intently, her curiosity growing with each word. She knew she was on the brink of discovering something extraordinary. Eliza ran a hand over the cool, uneven surface of the glass. The shopkeeper, a frail old man with knowing eyes, materialized by her side.
Interested in that one, are you? It's quite the looker, isn't it? Been here longer than I have.
It's beautiful, but there's something strange about it.
The shopkeeper chuckled, a low, rattling sound.
They all have stories, those old mirrors. This one, well, let's just say it's seen its fair share.
He went on to explain that the mirror had belonged to a wealthy merchant from the 1800s, a man rumoured to have made his fortune through unsavoury means. The mirror, he claimed, had witnessed it all. The man's rise to power, his descent into madness, and his eventual demise under mysterious circumstances.
I'll take it.
The old man's smile widened, revealing yellowed teeth.
Very good.
Eliza brought the mirror home, its presence instantly changing the atmosphere of her apartment. The mirror was an antique with an ornate frame that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. It was a piece she had found at a quaint little shop on the outskirts of town, a place filled with curiosities and relics from bygone eras. It stood in the corner of her living room, an imposing and enigmatic figure. The mirror's surface was slightly tarnished, adding to its mysterious allure. It seemed to draw the eye, commanding attention and respect, as if it held within it the essence of all who had gazed into it before. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that it brought with it, the sense of being watched that lingered even when she wasn't looking directly at it. The air around the mirror felt different, heavier somehow, as if it was charged with an unseen energy. Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone, that the mirror was more than just a reflective surface. At night, she'd sometimes catch a flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision, a shadow that seemed to dance just out of sight. It was always fleeting, gone before she could fully register it, leaving her questioning her own senses. A fleeting glimpse of something dark and undefined reflected in the glass. It was as if the mirror held a world of its own, a world where shadows had form and substance. The figure was always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.
It's just my imagination. It has to be. Eliza tried to convince herself, her voice barely a whisper. She had always been a rational person, not one to believe in the supernatural. But the mirror was testing her resolve, making her question everything she thought she knew.
One evening, as she was getting ready for bed, Eliza paused to glance at her reflection. The room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The mirror seemed to shimmer in the low light, its surface almost liquid in appearance. She froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. For a split second, she could have sworn she saw a figure standing behind her in the mirror's reflection. It was a fleeting image, but it was enough to send a chill down her spine. It was tall and gaunt, with long, shadowy fingers that seemed to twitch with a life of their own. The figure's eyes were dark and hollow, staring back at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. It was a sight that she would never forget, a vision that would haunt her dreams. She whirled around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty, just as it had been moments before, but the image in the mirror had been so vivid, so real, that she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong.
Just a trick of the light. Just a trick of the light. Eliza repeated the words like a mantra, trying to calm her racing heart. But deep down, she knew that what she had seen was no mere illusion.
Shaking off the unsettling vision, Eliza attributed it to exhaustion and an overactive imagination. She told herself it was just a trick of the light, a fleeting hallucination brought on by the stories she'd heard about the mirror's past. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. She tried to reassure herself, but the feeling of unease persisted. The mirror seemed to have a life of its own, its surface shifting and changing in the dim light. It was as if the mirror was trying to communicate with her, to show her something that she couldn't quite grasp. A fleeting hallucination brought on by the stories she'd heard about the mirror's past. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. The stories of the mirror's haunted history played on her mind, feeding her growing anxiety. She couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to the tales, if the mirror really was a portal to another world. The feeling of unease intensified, a constant gnawing anxiety that clung to her like a shroud. It was as if the mirror had awakened something within her, a primal fear that she couldn't ignore. The mirror had become a presence in her life, a silent observer that watched her every move. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape its gaze. As the days turned into nights, Eliza's sleep became plagued with vivid, unsettling dreams. Each night she would dread the moment her head hit the pillow, knowing that the darkness would soon envelop her in a world of terror. The once comforting embrace of sleep had turned into a nightly ordeal, a journey into the unknown where her deepest fears came to life. She would find herself lost in a labyrinth of dark corridors, the air thick with the scent of decay and the sound of distant whispers. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows dancing menacingly as if they had a life of their own. Every turn she took led her deeper into the maze, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, as if they were guiding her towards something sinister. The mirror was always present in these dreams, its surface rippling like water, reflecting distorted images that seemed to beckon her closer. It was as if the mirror held the key to her fears, a portal to another realm where reality and nightmare intertwined. The faces she saw in the mirror were twisted, grotesque versions of herself, their eyes filled with a malevolent intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. She would wake with a gasp, her heart racing, the line between dreams and reality blurring at the edges. The terror of the dream would linger, a heavy weight on her chest that made it hard to breathe. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince herself that it was just a dream, but the fear was too real, too palpable to dismiss.
What? What was that? Her voice trembled as she spoke, the words barely a whisper in the stillness of the night. She could still hear the echoes of the whispers, the sound of her name being called in that raspy, otherworldly voice.
One night, the whispers from her dreams seeped into her waking hours. It started as a faint murmur, barely audible, but it grew louder, more distinct, until she could no longer ignore it. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with an eerie presence that made her skin crawl. She was startled awake by the sound of her name being whispered, a low, raspy voice that seemed to come from the very air around her. The voice was familiar yet alien, a chilling reminder of the nightmares that haunted her sleep. She sat up, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, only the oppressive silence of the night. She sat up in bed, her breath catching in her throat, as she saw the mirror's surface shimmering, even though there was no light source in the room. The mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own, its surface undulating like a living thing. She felt a cold sweat break out on her skin, her heart pounding in her chest as she stared at the mirror, unable to look away. A sense of dread washed over her, cold and suffocating. It was as if the darkness itself was closing in on her, wrapping her in its icy embrace. She could feel the weight of the fear pressing down on her, making it hard to think, hard to breathe. The room seemed to shrink around her, the shadows growing longer, more menacing.
This can't be real. It just can't be. Her voice was a desperate plea, a last-ditch effort to cling to some semblance of reality. But deep down, she knew that something had changed, that the line between her dreams and her waking life had been irrevocably blurred.
She tried to rationalize the experience, but fear had a way of unraveling even the most logical mind. The more she tried to convince herself that it was all in her head, the more real it seemed. The whispers, the mirror, the sense of dread, they were all too vivid, too tangible to be mere figments of her imagination. The line between what was real and what was merely a figment of her imagination was becoming increasingly blurred. She could no longer trust her own senses, her own mind. The world around her seemed to shift and change, the familiar becoming strange and the strange becoming familiar. The mirror, once an object of fascination, had morphed into a source of terror, its presence a constant reminder of the growing darkness that seemed to be closing in around her. It was as if the mirror held a piece of her soul, a fragment of her deepest fears that it reflected back at her. She knew she had to confront it, to face the darkness that lurked within, but the thought filled her with a paralyzing fear. With trembling hands, she reached out to touch the mirror, her fingers brushing against its cold, smooth surface. The mirror seemed to pulse under her touch, the ripples spreading outwards like waves on a pond. She could see her reflection staring back at her, its eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that this was a battle she had to fight, a journey she had to undertake, no matter how terrifying it might be. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself for what was to come. She knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with danger, that the darkness would try to consume her. But she also knew that she had the strength to face it, to confront her fears and emerge victorious. The whispers, the mirror, the darkness, they were all part of her, and she would not let them control her any longer. As she stood tall in front of the mirror, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The fear was still there, but it was no longer overwhelming. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, to confront the darkness and reclaim her life. The whispers might never go away, but she would no longer be their prisoner. She was stronger than her fears, and she would prove it.